of milk and water to the officers, and the entries of emergency vehicles. This is inhuman and is obviously unacceptable in all corners of the world.
There was another tense moment this morning when the police tried to bring in an ambulance at the CE's office compound.
We have had one of our officers collapse. I am now asking you to move off the road, please, to facilitate this officer leaving here so he can go to hospital.
While some protesters refused to budge, others wanted to cooperate. The police had to separate the crowd to allow the ambulance to move forward. Access to the central government offices at Tema was also blocked by barricades set up by the protesters. This man says the blockade aims to paralyze government operations. This woman says she's a cleaner at CGO and demanded the protesters let her go in. After some negotiation, protesters allowed her to pass through the blockade. Occupy Central organizer Benny Tai spoke to the protesters, but he was told neither the Occupy Central organizers nor the students represent all the protesters. The CGO at Tema was closed for the day, and many officials went to work at the former government headquarters on Government Hill instead. Owen Fung, TVB News.
The government says it hopes classes can resume on Monday at schools in Wan Chai and the Central and Western districts. The situation has resulted in some frazzled nerves among parents. Li Jun has more.
This morning, some Form 6 students returned to their school in the Western District to prepare for their school-based assessments. This student said he's worried that the continued class suspension would affect his results in the Diploma of Secondary Education examination. The school's principal Chen Yunling said students and teachers alike wish to resume classes as soon as possible. Chen hopes the Education Bureau will allow secondary schools or schools in less affected areas to resume their classes. She added that there will be extra lessons in her school to help students catch up with their studies. Another secondary school, Yinghua Girls' School, got the government's approval to resume classes on Monday. The school, located on Robinson Road at the mid-levels, is currently under renovation, and students had been attending school at another site in Shamshui-Po. The school has already informed the parents through text messages about the latest development. The government hopes to resume classes starting next week.
We would continue to liaise with them to see what kind of preparation they have been and what difficulties they would meet. And we hope the earliest time for class resumption is Monday. But that would depend on whether schools would be ready for this.
This parent took to the streets to confront protesters, saying that her daughter, a primary school student affected by the class suspension, wants to go back to school badly.
I have to take care of her every day. I cannot go to work. This is the disturbance to my daily life. I only want to back to the normal life.
But it's still unknown whether classes would be suspended next week. The Council of Central and Western District School Heads said it will stay in close touch with the Education Bureau for information on the latest situation. Meanwhile, some teachers and tertiary students have formed volunteer groups to assist students who have been affected by the class suspension. Li Xian, TVB News.
Financial Secretary Zhang Zhang said today if the Occupy movement persists, it will cause permanent damage to the local market. Stephanie Choi has more.
If this situation were to persist, then we're going to see some damage to our system. And particularly our most concern is about our reputational risk as well as the confidence in the market system in Hong Kong. That would be a permanent damage that we could not afford.
The Financial Secretary's warning came as the hotel industry and eateries in districts affected by the Occupy movement reported feeling the pinch. Although the number of protesters on Canton Road in Tsim Sha Tsui has gone down significantly, and lines have once again formed outside branded stores. In Mong Kok, where protesters continue to gather, an eatery operator said business has dropped by 40%. He said with a hefty rent, it is possible that the business won't survive the rest of this month. A representative from the hotel industry said 5 to 10% of tourists have cancelled their bookings. He's concerned that the Occupy movement may push room rates down and threaten businesses. The Travel Industry Council said some 300 tours from the mainland visited Hong Kong every day for the first 4 days of Golden Week, which is about the same as previous records. But it is worried that along with the suspension of visits to Hong Kong by tour groups from the mainland, news about the Occupy protests broadcast by state-run TV will deter tourists from visiting Hong Kong. Stephanie Choi, TVB News.
In other news now, more fallout from Ebola spreading to the United States. Authorities now have to monitor 80 people who came into contact with the man who brought Ebola into the U.S. from Liberia. Sonya Artero has more.
Ebola has left Thomas Eric Duncan fighting for his life in a hospital in Dallas. But Texas authorities are trying to calm the masses, saying he couldn't have spread the deadly virus while having no symptoms.
No one who has been around Mr. Duncan during the time that he has been symptomatic has shown any indication of having contracted Ebola.
Should Duncan survive, Liberia plans to prosecute him for lying on an airport form that he wasn't exposed to anyone infected. NBC News investigated that Duncan was directly exposed. Dr. Nancy Snyderman interviewed an eyewitness who watched Duncan escort a pregnant woman with Ebola to the hospital. She died 2 hours later and her brother died within days. 5 days after helping a woman that Duncan was told was dying from Ebola, he still flew to the U.S. Now, a cameraman that NBC News hired to cover the outbreak is infected. As a precaution, the entire NBC News crew in Liberia is headed back to the U.S. to be quarantined and treated. Plus, United Airlines has had to alert 400 passengers who may have come into contact with Duncan during his flight to monitor their health. At an Ebola conference in London was a nurse who became infected while volunteering in Sierra Leone. He survived by being flown back to the UK for treatment. He recalled watching helplessly as an entire family died of Ebola and called for more action to fight the disease.
My specific fear is that the horror and the misery of these deaths really fill a well of my despair. And I just don't know what happens if that's repeated 1 million times. And so I say, at all costs, and we can't let that happen.
Sonya Artero, TVB News.
In sports now, at the Asian Games in Incheon, North Korea defeated Hong Kong to win the gold medal in the mixed doubles table tennis. Now to last night's emotionally charged men's football final between North Korea and South Korea. Rim Chang-woo scored near the end of the second period of extra time to give the hosts the gold medal. And the weather. The observatory issued the thunderstorm warning earlier tonight, and the unstable weather is expected to continue through the weekend. And now recapping our top story, angry residents clashed with Occupy activists in Mongkok and Causeway Bay tonight. There were lots of pushing and shoving. Some people even suffered cuts and were taken to hospital. Police reported 2 arrests. Stay with TVB News as we bring you updates throughout the night. And that's the news. Good night.